Alright, you Zog and Zogwits, it's time for some more Orc lore. Alright, hello everybody. So we are going to talk to you today about what is an orc. And the easiest way to start explaining this is what makes up an orc? What is it inside? So you have a fungus and a almost ape-like creature kind of combined together. The fungus and the creature have a symbiotic relationship, which means one helps the other helps the other. An orc doesn't have bones and organs that would equate to what you or I have, or even brains that equate to what you or I have. Whereas, we have a brain with a brain stem, and after that, it's basically nerves and nerve endings, and all your organs are attached to that. An orc is made up a little bit differently. Their bone structure itself is not like ours, where an adult male, if he falls off a 10-story building, all his bones are gonna shatter into tiny little fragments. Well, an orc's bones being permeated by this fungus, it doesn't make them unsupportive. They are still they're rigid to a degree, but they have a flex and a bend to them. It also allows them to heal much differently. You can cut off an orc arm, and because most of that arm is filled with a fungal neural system in it, you can basically staple that arm back on, and it will re-adhere itself to the rest of the body and function just fine. There have been accounts too where an orc has found a different orc's arm and just attached it. And because the fungus is basically the same throughout most of the orcs to a degree, there are some variations found, but for the most part, it'll just reattach itself because the fungus knows what it is. It knows it's an arm. The fungus is, in all honesty, as far as from a physiological standpoint, is more intelligent than the orc itself. It will, if there's a hole in the orc, it will just stop pumping what is essentially blood. It's not really blood. It's more like a fungal nutritional tract. That makes more sense. It's more like a pipeline with nutrients absorbed through the fungus, which takes over what would be a stomach. Their hearts don't beat quite the same way. It's more like a very slow, methodical squish versus a boom, 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 like a human's heart. It's more like just pushing the stuff out, so they don't bleed the same way. That's also why their blood is black in nature, a very dark reddish, blackish color, because it isn't just blood; it's blood and fungus. The brain itself, it's almost they have almost two brains like old dinosaurs, where they have their main brain, but instead of just one, the fungus itself is almost as if it's its own mind anyway. Take Gazgul Thraka. He had half of his head blown off, and they just attached a piece of steel to it, and the fungus took over the remaining area. And many have speculated that if you were to remove half of every orc's brain, they'd become unstoppable, because the fungus itself will grow a better brain than they had originally. And that's what happened to Gazgul, in theory. Is his brain was removed, the fungus took over and regrew brain that allowed him to be more intelligent. That's why he was as good as he was. So their bodies don't function quite the same way. They can jump off a building and they weigh 5 to 10 times as much as we do, and they slam into the ground, but their bones don't break. Whereas even a human in a similar form or fashion, let's take a space marine without power armor, if he jumps off a 30-story building, he will go splat. Orcs can survive this, whereas humans cannot. And maybe the difference between a Primarch could do that. But an orc can do, their bodies are made up so much differently than ours. And they're not a natural creature. And that brings me to my next point, which is how did we create, or how did they become a thing? And that's going to lead us to the old ones. Now, I'm not going to get too terribly deep into the old ones, but The old ones created, that we know of, at least 2 races, possibly 3. We have the orcs, the Eldar, and many speculate that they created the Tyranid as well, due to their similar genetic nature to, say, the orcs and the way the Eldar are as well. The old ones created races to fight the Necrons. Not specifically, actually, the Necrons. They did fight the Necrons, but their overlords at the time, who are now technically they're slaves. That's for an entirely different lore series, talking about all of that. But so the old ones were a frog-esque. At least that's how they're described. They're frog-like in appearance, and they were extremely intelligent, far older than most other races. And when the orcs were created, the orcs were created thought to be this entity that no matter what happens, you can't get rid of them, right? And by that creation, the old ones could use their Eldar to battle the front line, all the while planting their orc seed behind them to defend the planets. You're not going to take over a planet completely covered by orcs. It's just not going to happen. You can kill them and then they'll come back. And they do that because of how they grow. They are fungus in the ground. They only require a few spores to create a orc or orc-esque being. And I say that because not all spore pods or orc pods that are underground are going to create a full-fledged orc. They will create things like runt herders. You got a runt herder there. You have Gretchens and the little sad Gretchens, and you're normally they're going to create a runt first. The runt basically tends the orc fungal fields. So often the first embryos that will be, and this is due to an intelligent design behind it, usually the first thing to pop out will be, depending on how much there is, will be the runts, and then preceded by Gretchens and runt herders, along with food for them. And that comes in the shape of things like this. The squig. The squig is basically a universal creature. It has very tough skin, which creates extremely good leather, which can be utilized by the Gretchens to create armor for the more full-fledged orcs when they get around to being a thing. But squigs are also a food source. They grow out of the ground with zero tending for the most part, with very little tending by the runts and so they pop up. They're useful in the fact that they guard them, and they can turn around and be used for food. Now, that does not make them a nice creature by any stretch of the imagination. If there is like one runt and 50 squigs, the squigs are going to eat the runt. It doesn't mean they're not going to still propagate more of the others, but you get the point that all these creatures in and of themselves can defend themselves at their base nature. Take Gretchens, for instance. They're sad little creatures that get beat up by the orcs. However, in the hierarchy of an orc society, even though they are looked down on because they are small, weak, and green, green things are supposed to be strong. So you have the runts. Without the runts and the Gretchens and things like that, the orc propagation wouldn't happen. You wouldn't get full-fledged orcs, such as this. You wouldn't get this without everything preceding it. And you're not going to get this straight away either. You're going to start off with that little guy in there, and he's going to be feral. when the first orc pops up, he's not going to have the knowledge to make a shooter or a zap cannon or anything like that. He's going to know how to tie a rock to a piece of stick and hit things with it so he can survive. He'll eat, he'll produce more spores, and the cycle continues where they will not truly die out. There have been many accounts of where virus bombs have even been used in certain circumstances, but the orcs pop out 100 years later with a full-fledged warg, even though the planet was considered a dead planet. That's why on many dead planets that were exterminatus class weaponry was used against orcs are watched. They're watched by, small contingents of Astra Militarum and things like that, for the simple fact that at any point in time, they could repropagate onto the planet. But so you go from you get your little runt. He pulls out a runt herder, right? This guy is the one who trains the orcs. Basically brings them from being stupids into, gathering all the Gretchens to do what they're told. That's what his little claspy thing is there, is to keep things in line. He often has a squig with him, something he's tamed. He is a vital proponent of the orc population. Now, he in and of himself will not create that much in the way of orcs. But between him and all the Gretchen he has, and the large amount of squigs that he has propagated and things like that, in the end, due to his guidance, if you want to say, or his, beating, he will create more orcs. And this goes round and round. Round and round it goes until you get things as large as an orc war boss. Now, this orc war boss didn't start out this way. He started off as probably one of your generic orcs, or maybe even, something as sophisticated as that. He may have started off as that. Now, orcs never stop growing. The old tales of Gork and Mork, for instance, and if you notice, they look like two very large orcs. Now, this brings us back to kind of the old ones thing. Gork and Mork are probably the two first orcs that they created. And like I said, orcs never stop growing. And this can be seen in the tales from Ulanor original. When the Emperor and Horus and many other legions fought Ulanor to wipe out what they thought was the epicenter, the home planet of orcs. And they talked about fighting battles, running battles on top of mounds that turned out to stand up. And these were orcs. And now, were they Gork and Mork? Probably not. Whereas, in most cases, the mountain there in the foreground is what a large orc on Ulanor would be. Gork and Mork are hundreds of times that big. Probably have died since, or moved beyond, or maybe some have speculated they are the size of planets at this point, because they never truly stop growing. They would have a gravitational pull. And orcs without temptation, in all honesty, will get lazy. They will. They always want to fight. That is an orc thing to do, but without anything to fight, they will just sit around and do nothing. Without anything to do, they just do nothing. And they are happy and content in doing that. So there is speculation that both Gork and Mork are planets, most likely consumed by the Eye of Terror. So you kind of think we're not going to ever really see those. Exploring the Eye of Terror is is not a fun or desirable thing to do, being chaos or basically hell, for lack of a better understanding. But that is what it is to be a basic orc. Now, Gork and Mork are seen to be gods to the orcs, things to aspire to. You cunning and brutal and cunning. They are the same in a sense, though they are different at the same time. When large amounts of orcs get together and they all kind of think the same way, they start to grow larger in that fashion. And eventually they could return to that size. So there's other speculation that states that the Gork and Mork are literally just representations of what the orcs are trying to become. But I believe this is just about the right amount of time for our first video. It's a brief understanding of how an orc works and all that, and we'll get into their weaponry and everything else here this week. And so enjoy, and we will see you guys later. Have a wonderful time, and don't forget, you're a bunch of Zog and Zogwits.